am gonna call us to order just because we are, Janet and Michael are walking in. Here we go. Great, great.
Much less of a crowd than we had last month.
Wow. All right.
A little bit of a contrast.
I am gonna call us to order at 6:01. Oh, wait, to see your door is locked, Counselor Garrett.
Yes, I did. It was sufficiently pathetic, I hope.
This meeting is being recorded by the Economic Development Committee. If any other persons present are doing the same, you must notify the chairperson at this time. Okay. And Counselor Garrett,
Yes, I'm present.
Counselor Gordon,
Present.
Counselor Healy,
Here.
Counselor Minhas. Let me just make sure he's not on there. Nope. Hopefully he will show up. The video, it's recording automatically.
Is the showing?
Oh yeah, can you guys see us?
The camera's still facing down.
Hold on.
Oh, that's so creepy looking. Freaking out.
Not very good.
How's that? All right. Okay,
Hello.
great. First on, hold on. Here, which is where I'd like to look at it. Okay. We have approval of minutes from September 5th and September 10th. If anyone has any issues, I'll take them separately. Otherwise, I would take a motion to approve for both.
No moved.
Second.
You. Okay, and if anyone's here for public comment, you can sign up for public comment. And we have, if anyone online wants to speak in public comment, you can put your name and address in the chat. And otherwise, we will do public comment first before our motions. I think you're our only one.
You're on deck right now.
Okay, welcome.
So you can just say your name and where you live in Greenfield and then.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Tom Bledsoe, I live at 17 Chestnut Hill in Greenfield. And I'm a new resident here and I'm really impressed with the work you're doing around affordable housing. I've been involved in affordable housing for about 35 years and just retired from that work. And here in Massachusetts, but around the country. And I actually just got off a board meeting from a nonprofit in New Orleans that we built that's doing really great work there. But the network I was part of, its focus was really on best practices and sharing kind of what's going on in different parts of the country, learning from policy and also business. So it was, a network of very strong organizations, community builders here in town or working here in town is one of them, which I'm very excited about. So I speak just from a perspective of the role I was in was really learning what's happening in different parts of the country, what's innovative, what's impactful, and figuring out ways to share that. So I would just say I'm really impressed with what you're doing. And I'm particularly encouraged that you're being so practical about it. Because Greenfield has, I'm obviously new here. I just sort of have first impressions kind of coming from the east and coming out this way, but not as much. And we started looking more in the, Hampton County, Hampshire County and Southern, and, ended up really getting excited about here. And it was odd connecting to you, John, in a kind of an event that was just one of the very positive things about this town. But, I can see there's a lot of need for kind of investment and revitalization. And I think some of the housing stock is challenging. And I think the approach you're taking to zoning just makes a lot of sense. I think the cluster ideas you're encouraging, promoting more multifamily as of right. And I think reducing increasing the unit number from 25 to 50, a lot of the arbitrary things that are in the code now, which had good intentions, I'm sure, when it was created, now becomes kind of a burden. And I think the approach you're taking, which is what makes sense here, thinking about accessible housing and how kind of ground floor housing as well, maybe it's not just retail. Maybe it makes sense to be housing. So I think the approach you're taking makes a lot of sense. And I think the encouragement of development in a way that preserves the natural beauty of this area and the open space and tries to do smarter kind of cluster development is just all really to be applauded. So I saw nothing but good in what you're putting forward. I know there's been some controversies around the ADU stuff, which seems to be really a misunderstanding of more of the kind of what ADUs are about. I haven't heard that so much around this. It just seems like the ideas that you're putting forward are common sense, make sense. So I just stand as someone that really is encouraging it and applaud what you're doing. If I could be helpful in any way, kind of going forward, work with your work, I'd be happy to do so. And again, these kinds of issues are just communities in places all across the country that didn't used to have an affordable housing problem over the last 10 years and now have an affordable housing problem. Communities that didn't have a homeless problem are now having a homeless problem. I mean, it's just the kinds of issues that Greenfield is dealing with. Others are as well. And I think there really is an opportunity to learn from other places and then try to implement it here. I think that's what you're doing. I think a lot of the ideas in your proposal are kind of smart kind of development ideas. So I'm very positive about it, and any way that I can be helpful going forward, I'd love to support the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to Greenfield.
Thank you.
Is there, let me just see if there's any. Is there anyone online for public comment? Stephanie, you can go.
Hi, Stephanie Duclos, 166 Chapman Street. Still a little confused how we're having the hearing on this already when there's an open space task force that's been formed, and I'm not quite sure how they're working in conjunction with the cluster development. Also, the community builders owns, I think, Leiden Woods. Would that be an example of a cluster development, just so we can get a perspective? And the other one was the reductions of the setbacks up to 50% when we already when it came to this table, it was already reduced lower than the Audubon standards. And those are my only concerns. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. Susan Wargathic.
Thank you. I just want to say that in general, I support the cluster development proposal that is before the council. And I'm doing this as me, not as Housing Greenfield. I want to be clear. And that I believe that we need to look at, one model that might be useful is the Silvercrest, the condominiums there, where I think that that would be a cluster development. I'm not sure if there was more land involved than is there now, and is available. But I think that kind of a development is really, to some extent, what we're talking about. We are not talking about skyscrapers, and I think it's important for folks to keep that in mind. The second thing that I'd just like to mention is I hope that in the list of possibilities that you are giving for incentives, that you will include accessibility as one of those, because we are very much in need of accessible housing in town. And if we can encourage that through this method, as well as many others, I think it would be a really good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think the other person was Travis. Sorry, I took it down.
Yep. Hi, Travis Drury. I actually was just going to let you know that Elizabeth Garofalo, the Conservation Commission Chair, asked me to be here for the Conservation Commission. But we have a Conservation Commission meeting at 6:30. So if there are any questions you want to ask me before then, that would be a good time to do it. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for public comment? Okay, great. I know that you have a Conservation Commission meeting, and Eric, I think, do you have that meeting as well at 6:30? Oh. Okay, so Travis, if there's anything you want to share before, just in case we don't get to questions, you can do that now.
Yeah, I mean, the Conservation Commission hasn't met and discussed this yet. So I don't have anything to report from the Conservation Commission. And I guess I wasn't sure if you guys had questions about how this impacted, how it relates to the Conservation Commission's authority over wetlands and things like that. I wasn't sure exactly why, why I was requested to be here, but yeah, so I can't speak on behalf of the Conservation Commission because we haven't actually met and discussed this yet, but I can, share any knowledge I may have of the Wetlands Protection Act from my work there if you haven't.
Does anyone have questions for Travis?
I have a comment. I think the only thing that really affects Conservation Commission is in regards to allowing the wetland areas to count towards like the square footage of real estate for open space, and is it still a 50% requirement? So previously that wasn't allowed to be calculated in an open space, and in this change, they allow any wetlands on the property to count towards that open space. So that's something for you guys to kind of ponder about. That would be the only thing I could really think of that would affect conservation, but just, that's all I have.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Travis, we would love to have you for as long as you can stay and understand that you have to go in a few minutes, and if you need a break, like between meetings, do what you gotta do.
That's okay. I can go right from one to the other.
Okay, cool. And Eric, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Just a couple of points I wanted to make so that you're aware of the existing ordinance. So the first point I wanted to make is that the ordinance we're talking about, the Open Space Cluster Development Ordinance, already exists. It's been in place since at least 1989. The process that we're going through now is a recommendation of the master plan to protect open space, and it lists many ways to do that in the master plan. And it specifically called out modernizing, updating our open space cluster development ordinance. It was written in a time when it was progressive. Very few communities had it back then, back in 1989, but many communities have since adopted such ordinances and bylaws, and they have modernized them to bring it up to current standards. In other words, a greater set aside of open space. I'm aware of some communities that require a set aside of 80% of the land. So the other point I wanted to make is that, the frequency that this ordinance gets used. I've been in Greenfield for 17 and a half years, and I'm only aware of one time that this ordinance was used, and that's Silvercrest, which was previously mentioned. I did forward an email to Tammy to give to you guys that shows the original layout of Silvercrest standard subdivision as opposed to the open space that was actually approved and built on the site. I do want to address the comment on the open space. It's my understanding that if you're going to do a just single lot development, that the ordinance requires a set aside of open space, let's say the RA district, 40%. That 40% cannot include wetlands or slopes greater than 15%. But our existing cluster development ordinance, if my understanding is correct, does allow a set aside of, as part of that percentage of wetlands included. So I don't think that's changed in the ordinance. It's just a greater percentage of set aside of open space. But I'm here to answer any questions you have on the ordinance. I also sent you some examples that show a conventional subdivision as opposed to an open space residential subdivision. And you can see by the pictures I sent to you how much land is preserved and key features that you want to preserve get preserved. So I'm here to answer any questions you have in the ordinance and the process that we did to get where we are today.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Our third invited guest is David Singer. David, do you want to talk to us now, or do you want to wait until questions come up?
Thank you for inviting me. I didn't know my compadre Eric was going to be here, so I'll definitely defer to him. He certainly has historical knowledge. So I didn't know he was going to be here, but once he leaves, I'm happy to continue to answer questions about how this affects the distinction between how this affects zoning and subdivision.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to open it up for discussion.
Does the motion have to be?
Oh, do I have to
read
read it first? I probably do have to read it first before we, thank you. Sorry, I've literally been back to back all day. So I came from the opioid abatement funds meeting, which was on Zoom, and ran out the door to this meeting. Let me get there. All right, and I don't have to read the whole thing, right? I just have to read, right? What are you on the page?
I'm looking for the page.
Oh, wait, I think I found it. Here we go. The city council moved that it be ordered that the city council of Greenfield amend the zoning ordinance, chapter 200, section 39, open space cluster developments by adding language in bold and by deleting language in strike through as follows in attached exhibit A. And further amends the table of contents and index of the code, and further that non-substantive changes to the numbering of the ordinance be permitted in order that it be in compliance with the numbering format of the code of the city of Greenfield. 2/3 vote required. Okay, I will open it for discussion.
I have one thing.
Go for it.
The first thing I noticed is the 2/3 vote. The new state housing law changed the thresholds on the voting. And so there's like a whole frequently asked questions thing. And I think I'm 99% certain that open space development changes are one of those ones that requires a majority vote instead of 2/3.
Okay.
And
I had that question as well. Yeah, Eric, do you know the answer to that? If we need a 2/3 vote or simple majority now? Because I'm with Counselor Garrett. I think it's a simple majority.
That is correct. A simple majority vote was only required to adopt these amendments.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Great.
I'm putting a note in for the clerk here. And
follow up to that, our council rules have a majority being 7 votes. Is this just a simple majority where if there's like a quorum of 7, would that be 4?
the quorum
Yeah.
dictates the number.
Okay, so this is just going back to regular Robert's rules.
Yeah,
Okay,
I believe so, unless anyone thinks differently, but
That's my understanding.
yeah.
that makes sense.
I mean, I guess as far as this proposal is concerned, you know, we had quite the rollicking meeting last month. We had quite the time. Enormous public turnout, which was awesome. So grateful for everybody who came. And I think that there was a lot of confusion last month, right? You know, the room was packed. I've never seen this room full of so many people. And there were 3 different things on the agenda, the cluster development proposal being one of them. And I think that people got confused about, you know, what we were talking about when, you know, which proposals were part of what motions, like what was actually on the table to move forward. I'm saying that, like, I think everyone who's in this room right now, maybe most people here were at that meeting and know that, but I'm saying it for the benefit of anyone who maybe wasn't at that meeting or hasn't seen the recording of it. And so, you know, it went to full council, but came back here because we needed to really like pull those things apart, right? And make it really clear that, we're just talking about the open space cluster development proposal. And it's not about ADUs and other stuff. There would be things that are on the agenda next month that I'm excited to talk about. It's not about the, camper trailer proposal. So those are off the table. The only thing that's on the table now is open space cluster developments. And, as Director Twarg said, we already have an ordinance on the books for cluster development. It's not something that gets taken advantage of very often. My understanding is that this proposal, which, the planning board and FERCog have worked really hard on for several years now, really makes pretty minor tweaks with the goal of actually enticing developers to take advantage of the cluster development zoning ordinance more so that we have some chance of getting more housing development in Greenfield, right? Like we all know we need more housing. We need more different kinds of housing. This is one small way to hopefully get us to a point where people will come and develop housing that we desperately need. And I think it's great. To me, there's just no downside. And we've heard from some members of the public who pointed that out as well, that it just doesn't seem like there's any negative on this. And certainly, I'll also mention, I know some of us have, are close to people in Western North Carolina. I have dear friends in Western North Carolina. I'll remind us that a big goal of this is watershed protection and stormwater drainage and environmental protection. And I think it's just that much more stark now than it was even 2 weeks ago, how important it is that we protect our watersheds and, don't just pave over all of our land and make it more susceptible to flooding and all the crazy things that we've seen and are probably going to see again in the next few days in Florida, unfortunately. So all that is to say, I think this is great and I hope we move it forward and I hope that the council will approve it because I think it's just very net positive and no downside that I can see.
Yeah, I read over probably a dozen times since before last month's meeting to now the original proposal and the amended proposal that we have in front of us tonight. The only difference here is really that there's an incentivized for the increased density. Like I was disappointed to see the recorder like frame this as like a densifying instead of protecting open space. It's like there is this flip of there's this I don't even know what it is. Like there's this spinning of this proposal as if it's something bad and like the big developers are gonna jump all over this. Like that's not what this is. And I think it was you, Eric, who, and I read this in the recorder too, so apologies if you didn't say this or if it was attributed to you and it wasn't you. But the council has shot down multiple zoning changes over the last decade and that's needed for housing to be built in the city. And so for me, as I've read both things, like we're not talking about amending what we already have on the books. That's a whole other project if we want to do that. So a lot of the things that were brought up by the public last meeting or that have been brought up, those would be amending what we already have on the books. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is adding the incentive for density and the protection of open space. So what we get from this is conservation and housing. And, there was this narrative that came out a couple of times. I think it came out at one of the housing meeting and it came out definitely in the comments last month and maybe even on city council floor that we don't need more housing because our population hasn't increased and like that couldn't be more wrong. I think it's like the stat is that we need 5 million new homes across the US. And so the good thing is the sliver that we need in Greenfield is relatively small compared, but we have a deteriorating housing stock. We have an aging population whose housing needs change. And so that means that 50 years ago, when we had the same population, that population had a larger amount of people living in homes with them, which is not what we have. And we have this myth of like middle housing is what they call it. And it is smaller units, but one level accessible. And I think this gives us an opportunity to have that. And so you know, this isn't the type of development that in the past has been seen as bad, where it's like land taking and paving over natural spaces. This is very different from what's being proposed. And so I feel like I know more about cluster developments than I ever thought I would at this point. And I'm fully in support, and I really hope that the council will pass this. Even though I think it's gonna be like minimal, the amount of that it's used, I hope it's used. And I hope that it's not a big fight to get it used.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You know, for lack of a better phrase. This, you know, the fact that we're going from a cluster development model that takes up more land and preserves less to one that takes up less land and allows more housing to be built. And I think the density is a good feature of it because that allows you to retain more land otherwise. I appreciated Derek mentioning the wetlands piece earlier. That is such an important kind of habitat, and as Councilor Gordon mentioned with flooding, you know, so there's a lot of good to this. I hope some get built. We see some trails, you know, some sort of recreation for the public. Like it's, again, I just see it as a positive move.
I agree 100%. I think this is a good way to get developers in here and build housing that isn't an eyesore, isn't, you know, it has a lot of open space, a lot of community space for the residents. It enables, you know, some of the larger houses in Greenfield maybe to allow, you know, some of the elderly to move out and open up those houses to more families in Greenfield. So there's a lot of positive things that will come from this. And I'm actually really excited for this.
So,
Can I say a few things?
yeah.
Thank you. Sorry I'm not on camera. I'm having some technical difficulties. That's why I'm a little late. I have to say I have given this a lot of thought. I have had many conversations with people, many other counselors, and I think a lot of what my concerns were basically that we should try to focus on in future developments to increase home ownership and to give people a chance at the working class American dream. And many of those counselors and many other people have expressed support for that. And I appreciate them for having those discussions with me. I'm not opposed to this as I was last time. I think I had some very uh, significant concerns about what it might entail. I've done some research, and specifically, I would just like to say talking with Counselor Garrett was really helpful in trying to flush out what this would actually entail for the community and for housing. I still think that this is not the complete picture, and I would like to express that to community members because I was under that false illusion. And you know, you sometimes just get heated when there's a crowd full of people and it feels like, you know, some of them might be on your side or some of them, you know, you have to speak up for them. And but I just want to remind people that I don't feel like this is the end all be all. This is all there is to housing. There's a lot more projects that we can work on, and I'd love to collaborate with counselors and other folks who are working on housing to increase home ownership. But I was talking with another counselor just a few days ago, and I was like, one of the biggest obvious glaring things that would support this is like if you have more of something, it becomes cheaper. And that you know, that's something I from the start I could tell that, you know, this is I I want the basic day-to-day economic conditions of people to be better. Um, and I feel like this would do that, you know, and but also that doesn't mean this is all we can do. There's definitely more stuff that we can do. And again, I'd just like to thank the conversations that I've had with other counselors, with the executive level and other people who have really expressed that there's other things that we can also work on. We can specifically focus on home ownership as well, and perhaps that we can have that be a separate ordinance, a separate project. And I'd love to work on that with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, I read a report today that was saying that when it was mostly looking at cities, it was very hard to find like actual reports on rural or like rural city cluster development and zoning changes. But I was reading a report that was talking about how in cities that have changed their zoning laws to allow increased housing, whether it's cluster developments or ADUs, that rents stabilize in the first 2 years and then actually go down over a 5-year period. And then also states that have done that have seen wages overall rise. And so it was, I think at the beginning, you had said something about like this was good for the economy and there was like something else, and I couldn't tie it to like how would this make rents go down beyond housing stock increasing. So yeah. Great. Does anyone else have anything to say?
I
Invited
did
guests?
have a question actually.
Oh yeah, go
Are
for
there
it.
any proposed locations or any type of like
No, this is actually a zoning change, which I love when we do this. There's nothing in the works that this needs to be, like, there's no developer on deck, there's no permit languishing, there's no, like, this has been like a long time study related to the master plan that was then crafted so that how could we get what we need for Greenfield to function as a city well and have what the people in the city need. And so that's where this came from. There's nothing like on deck.
Okay, I think I might be getting ahead of myself. I just got a little excited because I was like, okay, where could this possibly happen? But that's
Well,
further down
that's like the next ordinance that like, I mean, we can maybe, there's $350,000 in ARPA funds on the table. Travis, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave for my other meeting, so I just wanted to add that, I did look at the wetlands and like how the wetlands would count towards the open space under the new changes. And I guess I just wanted to point out for clarity that the Wetlands Protection Act and the City of Greenfield Wetland Ordinance would still apply to any developments that are utilizing this. So there's a 20-foot no disturb zone around wetlands in Greenfield under our ordinance. Anything within 100-foot buffer of a wetland would need to be reviewed by the Conservation Commission. And anything within 200 feet of a stream. Any 200 feet of a perennial stream is protected under the Wetlands Protection Act, and 200 feet from an intermittent stream is protected under our ordinance. So that covers a lot of natural features that would be protected and would be reviewed by the Conservation Commission just as any other project would, cluster development or not. And then the last thing I would say is that because the open space land, including the wetlands, would be required to be protected permanently, either by transferring to the city or with a conservation restriction, that really aligns with the Conservation Commission's goals of increasing protected wetlands and features like that. And I think there was even a bonus that if it was next to existing protected land, you got like an extra bonus. And the Conservation Commission has laid out sort of this goal of, if new land was to be conserved, what would we be prioritizing? And that's one of the features, is if it's adjacent to existing conservation land or land that's already preserved, that's like a fair priority for the Conservation Commission. So I guess I just wanted to point out that, all of those things would still apply, and the permanent protection of the wetlands would align with what the Conservation Commission already, wants to do.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I would also just, if you are available for our full council meeting which is the 16th this month. That would be lovely. I don't know what the debate's gonna look like, but I don't think it would hurt to have, folks there who could answer these types of questions. I mean, the thing that you just said about putting it into permanent conservation land and it being one of the goals of the Conservation Commission is really compelling. So if you can be there, great. I can see if I can get you on the invited guest list so that you could speak out of public comment.
Okay, yeah, and I can bring that up at the Conservation Commission that I'm leaving, the meeting that I'm leaving for right now.
And thank you
Sure.
for doing back-to-back meetings. We appreciate it.
No problem. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks, Travis.
David, did you have something?
I just want to reiterate what Eric said, and to let the public understand, I think because you brought up so many different zoning amendments around housing, that this got pulled into other concerns. What you have here is the ability to overcome zoning constraints, which require certain frontage and acreage on lots when you subdivide property. It incentivizes the developer to conserve land in order to get smaller lots, and then with those smaller lots, hopefully, especially with this change, to get more lots in a cluster development and more housing. So that's what you're doing with this ordinance. There are other laws that control, Eric, again, help me. There's the subdivision control law that's in play. That's a whole different place. That's what the planning board deals with. So if you go in for a subdivision, that's the first stop is to compare a normal subdivision with this proposal. But you can't do this proposal unless you get relief from the zoning frontage and acreage requirements of each of the sections. And so that's what this does in a technical way. And the policy isn't necessarily that place. So that's why I'll let Eric speak to that. But that's what's going on here. So you already have this in place where people can do this. It actually further incentivizes a developer by adding other criteria that allows for more building and more houses or more buildings on the lot based on these formulas, and also the incentive formula, which I want you to know requires a special permit from the planning board. So it means that it can't just happen automatically. So some eyes will look at it. For those who care, they will be given full notice of the fact that that's happening. Any of this cluster development, by the way, it's not a site plan situation. It is a full notice. The submittal of this plan requires notice under both subdivision control law and then if a special permit is required under zoning law, so that folks in the neighborhood will have a chance to weigh in and express their concerns to the boards. So I just want to say that if you separate it from the other emotional stuff that came up, it really is a good transformation of what was ahead of its time into something that now is better and connects with the master plan. So I think it's, now that you've all come back down to earth, I think it's a good ordinance and should be passed. So thank you for allowing me. I'm speaking as a zoning person, not as a citizen. This is just the idea of what, I won't listen to this on the zoning board because the planning board will, but I know from my own experience what this entails, and I'm just expressing to you and the public those ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric?
Thank you. I just want to make a clarification there that open space cluster developments is a form of subdivision and is under the subdivision control law, and that the planning board would be the authority to approve it. And no other board is required, only the planning board. For subdivisions, there is a notification requirement for all direct abutters and anybody across the street from a proposed subdivision. So notice would go out to all neighbors so they could comment on it and express their concerns, but it's all under the subdivision control law and under the purview of the planning board. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Couple of questions. Go for it. Okay. I guess just to clarify that, I appreciate, David, what you just said about it going through the planning board process, because I think that one question that's come up is like, we have this whole list in here of all of the density bonuses. And I've heard a little bit of concern of like, what if a developer came in and did a whole bunch of these things? Then could they have 100% more dense development than, they would otherwise be allowed to have. And it sounds like the answer to that is no, because the planning board could say no. Is that correct?
It's really not a question for me. That would be more of a question for Eric. I think
Okay.
that formulas speak for themselves. Maybe there are situations that, that are out there that nobody's thought about, so that's a good question, but I don't think generally that would happen. It's expanding open space, shrinking developable space to a place where it reaches an equilibrium. And equilibriums are in two places. One is the regular place that's now been a little bit modified, and then the new place would be the special permit place. So that equilibrium is a little bit different. So I think you need to ask Eric that question in specifics, but it will ultimately reach an equilibrium, and they'll have open space, and you'll have only the maximum number of buildable lots.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Eric, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, to be clear, if we had a developer come in and say, I really want solar panels everywhere, and I really want, affordable senior, like, I'd love for as many things in here to be realized as possible, but, I guess the question is, at what point, do we say, okay, you can't actually get me more of a density bonus, even if you're doing these things we want to incentivize? And whose job is it to say that?
It is the job of the planning board, you're correct, and they can say no. But David summarized it well. I mean, just the logistics of doing such a development, the amount of space that has to be set aside as open space, 50%, the amount of space needed for utilities and road construction. No one's going to be able to actually do every single one of those and get 100% density over what is currently allowed now. I don't see that happening, and the planning board does have the authority to say, when enough is enough for the cluster development.
Great, thank you. My other question, I do, by the way, I want to offer an amendment related to accessibility to this, so I'll get to that in a moment. Eric, my other question for you is, how long did it take to build Silvercrest? Like from the outset of, planning it to actual completion. I was not in Greenfield. I haven't been here that long, so I'm curious how long it took.
Yeah, so let me figure that out now. I mean, I got here and it was just being constructed, and it was finished, I would say about 8 years ago. I mean, the road was accepted like within the last 10 years. So the last lot development was around that time. So it took probably over 10 years, 15 years to build the entire subdivision. And another good example is McCart Acres. That was a subdivision approved, 31 lot subdivision, not a cluster. Bad, a standard subdivision. If you look at it, you can see, no, that's not the way to do it. That took up until a year ago to construct, since 2005, because of the economics of construction, road construction, and housing development.
David, did you have an answer to that question? Oh, you're muted.
On a practical level, developers also phase in these kinds of things, so they don't do them all at once. You put a few in, people buy it, it creates a market. What this does, it grants the permission, and it gives, again, Eric can add the specifics, but it adds a period. It creates a period of time in which the developer is protected from zoning changes. So they come in and they get the permit, and then they begin. Many times there's a phase in of what they're going to do. But that's the developer's decision. The law doesn't require a phase in. Is that fair to say, Eric?
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think that's helpful for folks to remember also, is that we're talking about something that if we change it now, and even if we immediately get a developer that wants to come in and do this, which is a big if, we're not looking at a ton of houses being constructed next year, 5 years, even 10 years from now. We need to do this now so that we're setting Greenfield up, in another way for a better future housing wise, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I think that's an important piece of it.
Yes. Do you want to do your amendment?
I can offer my amendment. And I will say that this is, open to tweaking. So I would love to hear, folks' thoughts on it. But amendment I'd like to propose to this is to add to that list in section G, another density bonus. In the design feature column, the added design feature would be that OSCD contains dwelling units designed according to principles of universal design, such that they're safe and accessible to people living with physical disabilities, including seniors. And the bonus offered would be a 10% bonus if 20% or more of the units meet this standard. My thought here is, as we've talked about, we need a lot more accessible housing in addition to needing more housing in general. Universal design is a great approach.
Hold on one
because-
second, sorry. We have to, so you made a
Oh,
motion.
right, sorry.
It has to be seconded. All in favor? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, we have to do a roll call.
Yes, we do.
Sorry.
Say it's okay.
We're glad you're here.
I'm sorry that Counselor Garrett,
Yes.
Counselor Gordon,
Yes.
Counselor Healy.
Yes.
Counselor Minhas.
Yes.
Okay. And the motion that we are going to discuss is an amendment to add to the list in section G, an additional density bonus in the design feature that says the OSCD dwelling units will be designed according to universal design specific to, did you say elderly?
Such that they're accessible to people living with physical disabilities, including seniors.
Accessible for
I
physical
can send the exact
disability.
language.
And that will include a 10% bonus if 20% or more of the units meet that standard.
Yep.
Okay, now we can discuss, sorry.
Thank you. I'm still learning the process. Yeah, so thinking here is just that, universal design I think is something that we should all be aiming for in just about everything that we do, whether it's building or teaching or, whatever it is, because it just means that as many people as possible with as many different kinds of abilities, disabilities, et cetera, are able to access, the thing that we're talking about. And it just means that, in the case of housing, it'll be accessible, available to a wider range of people who, in terms of specific populations, people with disabilities and seniors are, specifically people who are even more in need of housing than the general population in Greenfield. So I'd love to offer a bonus to try to incentivize making more of this, hopefully future housing accessible. The bonus numbers I really came to just to keep it consistent with the other bonuses being offered here. I don't really have a mathematical kind of calculation around that other than, consistency seemed good and it seemed like a reasonable, I'd love to see 50% of the units meet this standard. That doesn't seem so reasonable to me. So I don't want to make it, unattainable. But that's something where I would actually love to hear from you, Eric, about whether that seems like a practical bonus to offer, if you would put in a different number than that.
No, actually, that's something that we should have put in there, and I think that's great, actually. Anything to do to increase accessible housing is a good thing. I think those are reasonable numbers you picked, if it's in line with the existing bonuses. And thank you for adding that.
Awesome, thank you.
I 100% support that.
100%.
Great.
We can take a vote. Counselor Minhas, unless you have some comment on this.
Nope, I support it.
Great. So, Counselor Garrett,
Yes.
Counselor Gordon,
Yes.
Counselor Healy.
Yes.
Counselor Minhas.
Yes.
Okay, so the amendment is approved. Do we need more discussion on the amended? All right. So we'll do I have to read it again?
I think we're technically still in that
Oh,
discussion.
we're still in that discussion, so we can just vote.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
with the amendment, this is where I'm like, all.
No, we
Yeah.
go back to the same
Because we did
discussion.
that vote.
Okay, we go back to that, all right. So great, all in favor of the cluster development?
Still has to be a roll call, sadly.
Yeah, it does have to be a roll call. Counselor Garrett,
Yes.
Counselor Gordon,
Yes.
Counselor Healy.
Yes.
Counselor Minhas,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna vote yes as well. So this will have a unanimous positive recommendation to the council. Great. And does anyone have any new business?
Just want to say thank you, Eric and David, for being here, and Travis when he was here. Really helpful. We really appreciate it.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
thank you
inviting
so
me.
much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I hope we will not vote down this again, this type of thing again at council this month, so,
There's two people other than the five of us.
yeah.
I'm almost a majority at this point.
Yeah, we're doing good. It took us a little more time than usual, but what else is new?
I think it's good though. Hopefully this actually like really clarified it for people.
Yeah.
And gives everybody a chance to really feel like we've understood what's being.
We have 6.
We have six. Oh, yeah. We're good to go. We're good to go.
I'd
Okay,
just like
and-
to say I'm glad that this was brought back and we had that time and space to kind of think about it, have those important conversations, because I didn't want to be like, oh my God, I'm against housing. I didn't want to be that person. But also I'd just like to say, I don't know if this is the correct space to say, but I just wanted to publicly say I want to take any responsibility for any of my actions and the way that I behave publicly. I feel like the last meeting I might have been a little harsh and I might have cut off people, and I don't want to be that way, and I just want to apologize publicly for that if anyone was offended by that, and I will try to not do that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I appreciate that a lot.
Just for what it's worth, I really appreciated talking to you, Counselor Minhas, when we had a chance to do so. It was, it honestly just made my week a better week coming into this. So you were appreciated in your thoughtfulness. So thank you.
Great. This is great. Feel much better. Our next meeting, did anyone have new business? Okay, I have no old business.
Actually, one other thing I just want to mention to the public, just so folks know, the Greenfield Housing Study is online. People can access the draft, people can access the slides from the presentation. So since we're talking about housing, great place to look.
Yeah.
Tons of good information there. And hopefully we can continue to all bring our great ideas about how to increase housing in Greenfield.
Yeah. And as a reminder, also next month, we will be discussing the ADU ordinance. It's a little wonky that the public hearing is November 7th, before our EDC meeting, which is on November 12th. So the hearing happens, we're having a joint hearing November 7th. Please attend that if you would like to. And our next full EDC meeting where we will be discussing ADUs is November 12th at 6 p.m. in this room, City Hall Meeting Room, 2nd floor, or on Zoom hybrid unless otherwise posted.
It will also be those other amendments as well that aren't ADUs, right?
Yeah, that's all, they all are traveling together.
The ones that are less controversial.
Yeah, they're all traveling together, yeah.
As a glorious pack. Yes.
Lucky you.
So I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Third, fourth.
We have to roll call out. Counselor Garrett,
Yes.
Counselor Gordon.
Yes.
Healy.
Yes.
Minhas.
I like this energy, but let's leave.
Okay, thank you all. This meeting is adjourned at 6:55.